So rather than focus only on the honeybee, we see that colony collapse disorder, and I'm going to talk about nosema and foul brood and varroa mites and all these maladies are all honeybee oriented. And as we watch through what's happening with the honeybee, there's so many things going wrong. We're working against nature. And really, I'm going to say colony collapse disorder, they kind of haven't really figured out. It's kind of a lower key piece nowadays. They've, in the honeybee area, focus on the varroa mite, focus on a couple of different items. These are all symptoms to the root problem. And I believe the root problem is, as I'm going to call it, earth true. Why are we working against nature? First question. And let's look a little bit into it. So if you're staring at a honeybee hive, and I'm going to say a couple hundred years ago, the hive splits and swarms and sends out scouts, and the bees relocate maybe about half a mile away. Next year, same thing. Both hives split, swarm, send out scouts, and they're not doing this, they're doing this, about half a mile, maybe a kilometer. They're doing this. Why? The honeybee is an awesome pollen collector, and probably in that half-mile range, it's best for foraging if the other hive is a long ways away, and probably also pest and disease control. Okay, so that's what the bee wants. But because it's not, and we'll talk a little later about it, it's not a great pollinator, we put them side by side by side by side. You look at orchards, you've got maybe a hive or two per acre, and Google Earth this. Now maybe you've pulled out maybe a mile, looking at a mile or two radius, you're actually going to see in that radius close to 500 million to 1 billion honeybees, all doing this, all overlapping. And we're finding, this is recent research, that the diseases are being left in the flower. And so clean bees are picking up the diseases and head back to their hive. So I believe the symptoms are all of these Israel acute paralysis virus, deformed wing virus. The symptoms are we've got too many bees in one area. Pick whatever room you're in, whatever gymnasium, and you just crowd it full of people. And a few people walk in with the flu. I wouldn't want to be there for the weekend. It's the same thing that I believe is going on with our honeybees, is we're misusing an awesome honey-making insect, and the problem is too many bees in one place. So what we've found that when people are using Chemlawn TruGreen chemicals, I don't necessarily think that the honeybees are failing that bad. When you put a hive, they spread into a mile or two radius, and so they're picking up chemicals from everywhere, and a little yard probably isn't that big of a deal. But if you shift into the native bee arena, where the bees are very tight, they're maybe in a 200 or 300 foot radius, what we've learned, I raise mason bees. I've got some people around the country raising these gentle little bees for me. And one year, normally in a year, I'm going to give you a couple hundred cocoons. Every cocoon is a bee, so a couple hundred bees. And by the end of the season, maybe you have 400 or 500 cocoons. It's really great. Okay, steadily get a couple hundred, get about 400 or 500 back. Well, one year in New York and around me in Washington State, boy, both places got maybe 10 or 15 bees, a couple hundred bees, 10 or 15 bees. The parallel answer in both these things is they put down TruGreen in their lawns. And my only supposition at that point was that the bees just didn't like the place. One more year later, we're now, peer of mine is in cherry orchards out in Washington State, and you had twin orchards, kind of a control and not, maybe about 20 minutes apart, so you had the same types of cherry trees, the same bees, the same mud they needed, same. This one did actually just fine. The bees pollinated well. But as you're coming back to about 10,000 bees per acre, so maybe 10 acres, 100,000 bees. Not one bee nested there. My friend gets back in his pickup and calls me up. Hey Dave, here's what happened. The farmer's really upset. He paid all this money and there are no bees. He says, and to boot, I smell like chemicals. I said, well, what'd the guy do? Did he spray? He goes, no, the guy said he didn't spray. I says, well, is there spraying going on right now? No. Well, go find out what happened. So we walked back out there, farmer's still upset. And the farmer says, you told me I couldn't spray, so I didn't. And my 80 acres of cherries are surrounded by hundreds of acres of apples. Well, they're spraying all the time. Okay. So my supposition, there were no dead carcasses in the holes that we had. the bees just gave the wing and off they went. And so I'm going to say with native bees, because they're not chained to a hive, the honeybees have to go, the bumblebees have to go back and forth and fly through this toxic stew. So they're forced to. A native bee that goes into a hole doesn't have to do that, and they can fly off. So chemicals aren't good, we know that. But I'm going to say in a lot of cases, a lot of our researchers may be showing that while the bees aren't necessarily there, I think they're just flying off. Neonicotinoids, or neonics, it's a classification of a pesticide that some big companies out there have had around for a long time. There's a lot of, I'm going to call it mismessaging. It's not quite conclusive. You really can't say these things. That's harming bees and insects and stuff. And funny, there's a real recent research that had, I think, 29 independent scientists going through about 800 independent peer-reviewed reports, and looking at all of these reports, have come back and said, probably the biggest issue are all the invertebrates in the ground. So your worms and your nematodes, those are getting probably the biggest damage. We're killing them off. Next, these are typically systemic. So I've coated my seed with this neonic. It pulls the neonic up into the plant. So now if anyone bites on a leaf, it dies. Well, if anyone gathers pollen from this same thing, what's the damage occurring there? And it's not that the bees are dying. We're seeing a real recent research came out in England, I believe, that had honeybees next to this neonic passage, neonic acreages, bumblebees, and then mason bees. So the honeybees, they've got a huge radius. They probably did pick some up here, maybe didn't. Bumblebees, the hive weight, they grow and they get heavier if you weight them, went down. And mason bees did far less numbers than the control site. I don't think the mason bees died. I think they just flew away. But still, you look at that, no one really died. And they think what's happening is the honeybees are losing memory. They're disappearing. Okay? Is there a good answer for neonicotinoids? Don't use them. Do we really need them? There's other evidence that's saying we're being told to put this in our farmlands, and you now look at the cost of the chemical that you're putting out there and the extra yield that you did or didn't get, and they're realizing that this might not be paying off. You're not actually getting the return that we've been told you'll get, so why are you doing this? Europe is already saying, I think, no. The US is still in a quandary allowing this to occur. So for right now, neonics, whether you're putting them in fields, they're trying to put them in oyster beds out in Washington State. When you put them in the oyster beds, you're trying to kill the brine shrimp or the sand shrimp that are down there that prevents the oysters from sinking. When you're doing this damage, you're spraying chemicals into just live estuaries, like live fields. Why would you do this? So, and my little corollary after this, if you want to get, you want to hurt the people that are doing this, there's already new classification of chemicals coming out. There's already new families coming out. Study those. Don't wait 10 to 15 years to ask about these chemicals. Why don't you start studying those now, so after these companies have spent millions of dollars of research on this new classification, stop it before it gets out. So they've wasted a lot of money. If we can maybe do that, it's possible we might be able to stop the use of these pesticides that are, I don't think, that valuable. Now, if I did, I just put a red spot on my forehead, from some laser rifle out there, because should I say that? I think that's a great to knock off Monsanto and Bayer and Syngenta and hit them in the pocketbook before they get out. Okay, so bees are looking for pollen, probably the biggest thing. They're looking for pollen as early in the season. We're talking March all the way through into August. There's different bees that'll show up and they're all looking for pollen. Okay. 2, they're looking for pollen probably from more native plants, So we're looking for heirlooms, a double blossom, something. Your hybrids are designed for humans, not for bees, because there's not a lot of pollen in those things. So native plants, pollen. A clean environment. So I'm now looking for less lawn treatment, less sprays into the yard. And then last piece, bees look for a place to nest. Okay? There's a lot of bees in the ground, so 3/4 of the bees are in the ground in a yard. If your yard's only grass and beauty bark and maybe asphalt or a roof or whatever, these bees can't get through to the ground. So leave a little, in the corners of your yard, just leave little places where bees can go tunnel into the ground. Or there are other bees out there that actually nest in holes. And so hole nesting bees, by putting out small, medium, and large holes in a yard, these bees are looking for, small bees are looking for small holes, big bees are looking for big holes. They're looking for holes. So put these holes around your house. In your little house, my company, Crown Bees, carries these things. But we're trying to find these bees, and this is what they're looking for. So pollen, some place to live, and a clean environment, those 3 things. Bees are facing a tough environment. We're taking their normal habitat and changing it to farmland, to roads, to urban settings. And the answer is kind of tough luck. There's not much you can do about that. I'm going to say lack of habitat, lack of pollen where these places used to have it would be, well, and probably chemag. We're just putting a lot of crud out there, whether it's in my yards or on the streets, going to the, probably those 3 things are impacting it. And the answer really comes down to what can you do about this? Plant flowers. Let's just add, put holes around your house. Let's add some habitat for these people, or for these bees that might not have it today. When we say monarch butterfly and we say honeybee, kind of really says there's only really one butterfly and there's really only one bee. And I don't know how many butterflies are on the world species, but on the bee side there's like 24,000, so we're only talking about one there. The monarch is a great, save the monarch and maybe you'll save all the other butterflies that are having their issues. I think from all I've read, a lot of chemicals, but this is a migratory butterfly that starts up in North America and goes all the way down to central Mexico. I think from what I've read, a lot of the bands of pollen as you're coming down there, you've just got soybeans or corn, and the butterflies just can't get across these barriers, these pollinator pathways, and so they're probably stopping and dying there instead of migrating south. And the thing down in Mexico, a lot of the places where they used to land are becoming less and less available. And I think there's probably other reasons that are going on out there, but those 2 things I believe are one of the major issues with the monarch. And again, less chemicals probably in your yard would be good. Add a little more pollen. I think every butterfly, every bee would probably thank you for that. Not a farmer. I am as a food eater, I don't appreciate the fact that we are putting a lot of crud on my food. I recognize why we need to do this. Farming used to be polyculture, where there was a lot of things all grown on your acreage. Nowadays we've got monoculture, where there's just one big extent of apples or wheat. Problem is when you shift to something that's all one thing, that's not working with nature, and nature's going to work against you. So I can take from this side root rot, and because I've got root rot, man, it just runs right through your apple fields, or I've got some fungus, runs right through. So because of monoculture and how we're farming, we've got to add, we've got now too many pests in here, we have too many funguses, so we've got to treat it with chemicals because we're working against nature. That tends to be our solution. I think that's not healthy for the environment. I think I'm confident that these chemicals are getting into our waterways and ultimately creating dead spots. Yeah, down there south of Florida. We're creating all sorts of downstream issues. Probably one of the pieces that I'm starting to understand, there's an ecologically sound golf course around me in Washington State. as I'm talking with these guys, they're saying, oh, this is the coolest research. Here's grass, and we're being told to put these chemicals and fertilizers on grass, and here's the mix. He goes, well, we're working with this one scientist across, I don't know, he's a German or something, and they're realizing that, well, grass is in the cousin family of corn, and actually the fertilizer concentration that we're actually using is based on corn. And so we're being told to put, you know, fertilizer and chemicals in for the corn, not the grass. And so as we're looking at it, he said 90% or more than that of all the stuff isn't being used by the grass, and it's just washing away downstream. So we've adjusted our fertilizers to be 5% of what we've been doing, and our grass is just fine. But this misunderstanding of how we should be fertilizing, if we need to, I think is another big issue, that we're doing a lot of damage by making assumptions. So out of maybe the 340 million people in the U.S., studies maybe 4 years ago showed that there was about maybe 42 million yards, so maybe I'd say an eighth maybe of the people grow. And that's probably a tomato plant or a cherry tree to, man, I've got a whole backyard just beans and carrots and peas. And so between all of that, that's awesome. Where my company is actually headed right now, we're working with a couple organizations that are more community-based, and we're trying to shift, it's going to take a while, communities and towns and cities to have edible landscapes. And the intent with this, we've got a couple of these in Seattle. You and I can just walk on down and grab an apple off a tree and eat it because I'm in the community and it's ours. So in some of these other communities that we're starting to see across the U.S., we're having beans that you can just pull off because it's in the right-of-ways. It's in between the sidewalk and the street. It's edible landscape that has flowers, will need bees, but can you turn your community into more of a community event? This is all, or a community, I say event. We're all growing food. That's where I think we need to head. It can happen, word of mouth. Get your, get your legislature, get your city council involved, get your urban, get your schools involved. It's so stinking easy. And you're putting down the stuff that you're working on the permaculture side. You don't have to water it all the time. Well, what we're learning, bees that nest in holes, native bees that nest in holes, I can take this from my yard and then give this to your yard, okay? So a bee that nests in a hole, a cavity nester, I can move around. We know out of the 4,000 species of bees in North America, roughly 20 to 25% nest in holes. So where are they? Okay. We have 3 of them. We've got the blue orchard bee, it's in the kind of northwest, it's kind of found in most states. We have a leafcutter bee that we kind of raise out of Saskatchewan, it's kind of everywhere. We have bumblebees that are manufactured in Mexico and kind of sprung around, and they're all kind of, they're there. We have them. But that's leaving 997 other species out there. And here's the piece. The bees that live in Toledo, Ohio, and are naturally there, are perfect for the Toledo, Ohio environment. And the bees of Tallahassee and of Seattle, all these different bees are out there, and we honestly don't know much about them. Okay, I had someone just north of me, a couple hours north of me, put out a bunch of holes in his yard and just in a urban setting, and he had 5 different species. Said, Dave, what are these? We looked at them, well, I kind of recognized one of them, and the other 4, they're bees. So my company is looking to create a native bee network. So we're trying to connect it. We're asking people, and we're actually in a programmatic state. I'm going to give someone a bunch of holes, low cost to these organizations, master gardeners and conservation districts. Let's go put these holes in a big, pipe, bunch of little holes. Let's go place them into fields and along roadways and right-of-ways and in backyards, and let's go find what bees are there. And it's kind of a little multi-year program. We'll find out the first year what nested here, we'll kind of look at it, and then put those same bees back to there. And did they come back? did they propagate? So all of a sudden now we've got, after 2 or 3 years, we've got a lot of 2 types of bees in Toledo, Ohio that really stand out. Okay, well, let's now actually learn a little more. Let's actually start raising these bees. So we're now putting them in propagation cages, and we're working with the scientists to do this as ethically as we can. And 8 years, 9 years from now, we're actually placing these into organic farms with the intent to use a local bee in a local crop to get more food. And so if anyone's listening and you're interested, let us know, info@crownbees.com. We want to work with you. We want to find these bees in North America, so Canada and the US. And this same statement, these same bees, the variety of bees that are out there, there's different bees in Ecuador and Ethiopia. We know there's whole nesting bees in Haiti. I mean, the bees are there across the world, and we just got to find them. And when we put these bees into farmlands, and this is science, farmers are getting 25 to 300% more yield by using native bees, not the honeybees. And it's a crazy idea. No, it's not. It's natural. Let's go start this. And so I'm going to say, to kind of finish this little statement, there's 2 times to plant a cherry tree: 20 years ago and today. Okay? So if we fast forward 20 years from now, hopefully we can look back to today and say, thank God we started then. Because now we've got these bees that we're able to use. And it's just, we've got to start now. Our food supply in the world demands it. So when Steve, president of the Real Truth About Health conference, called me up, gosh, a long time ago. He's an amazing, organized guy, very organized. As he reached out to me, I'd never heard of it. I went through the past couple speakers of the previous years, and I didn't recognize any of them, to be honest with you. But what I found as I looked through these was a common want to tell the truth. Okay, it wasn't hard to come out. I still had some doubts. The people that were on my particular panel that Steve had positioned me with 3 other wonderful ladies, I wasn't quite sure how this would work out. I had some doubts because I didn't know what they knew. Oh my gosh, just the value, the interaction that I was able to have here talking with people, but talking with these, listening to the people that care. I care about bees. These guys care about electromagnetic radiation. These guys, the people that Steve pulled in, I think are probably progressive visionaries, not afraid to stand out and tell the truth as they know it. You don't have corporations here. You have people that are trying to winnow their way through these the truths. And my only caution that, as you know, in this, is that there's always the truth as you say. So I've learned. Whoever's out there is going to tell the truth as they know it, and you're going to hear this side, and it's all the truth. These people over here are telling the truth as they know it, but in today's society you kind of have a polarized view. They're both telling the truth, and it's tough to discern what's the middle. And so I hope that I didn't catch any of this, but to tell the truth from this perspective, leaving both ends off, but here's where I think that the basic truth is. Those are the people that I think should be attracted here and should want to learn.